Welcome to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge, a podcast for tech executives. We provide strategies and tactics to help executives succeed and further their career goals. With interviews from industry experts, leaders, and innovators, this show will surely get you on the edge of your seat with thought-provoking advice on how to stay ahead of the competition. Welcome to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge, a podcast that explores the latest trends, strategies, and insights in the technology leadership world. From emerging technologies to digital transformation and beyond, we'll discuss the most important topics and ideas shaping the industry today. Join us to learn all of the juicy secrets of tech leaders, their biggest successes and failures on our quest for gaining that all-important technology edge. Are you ready? Let's get started. So today's guest is William Adams. William is an award-winning D&I innovator, engineering trailblazer, and philanthropist. From an early accomplishment of rolling out critical XML code to many of Microsoft's core products globally, he was later named the first technical advisor to the CTO of Microsoft, Kevin Scott. So welcome to the show, William.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I find it interesting that you were responsible for rolling out a lot of the XML code, because I can remember wrestling with the XML code back in the day.
Sorry, mea culpa.
It's your fault.
It is my fault.
But actually, what do you think? My first question for you, what do you think was like the cause of kind of the slow adoption of XML?
Part of it was I would say by design. So you have to understand how XML was used. And for those who don't know what XML is, the easiest way to think about it is it's a format like HTML, and it served a purpose that is now largely served by things like JSON. It's a data transfer format, but it's a whole lot more. It is the basis for things like SVG, scaled vector graphics, which is a graphics format, which is still used today and becoming even more popular. But back in the day, this was 1998, it was being rolled out because it was a universal data exchange. And this was where the early days of HTML, so angle brackets with tags and attributes and all that was a common thing, right? So it was natural that something like XML would happen. But we as big companies, as we tend to do, use the XML as a battleground, essentially. We had the XML specification, which is actually pretty short and simple. And then there was links and namespaces and schema and XQuery and XSLT, which was a style sheet thing, and XSD, which was another schema thing. So we were in the standards bodies, and at that time, Netscape and not quite Google yet. And we're doing battle. It's like, oh yeah, we'll try to implement this, So
Right.
for us poor schlub programmers who are trying to just use this stuff, it got pretty darn complicated, right? And then along came JSON, because people said, look, I just want something simple to exchange data. And JSON was way simpler for what people were trying to do with it. And that was the end of it. People said, okay, forget this XML thing. It's a bunch of noise. It's too difficult. The ecosystem is too hard. And that was the critical mistake. We were too caught up and we forgot the programmers. And the programmers forgot us. So that was it.
Yeah, it's like I at the time, I was a CTO for a restaurant delivery service, and we were the largest in the nation. You could think like Grubhub or, DoorDash today. In fact, Grubhub bought that company for $85 million to get at my technology that I wrote for them. And one of the things we were trying to do was make like menu entry faster for our side. So, you'd go out, you'd contract with a restaurant, and then you'd have to put their menu into your system. And so I created like an XML format, and I'd say, you don't have to worry about what the node says. Mm-hmm. You put the title of the item here, you put the description here, you put the variants here, etc. people just didn't get it. Like even
Yeah.
decent programmers, it just didn't get it. And
Yeah.
you're right. Like probably a few years later down the road, we switched off to JSON, and then it's like, here's a format, boom, it just works every time. And it was kind of frustrating, but I thought XML, to my opinion at the time, XML should have been huge.
Yeah, and it lives on and it's in ways that you don't realize. So all of the Office documents are simply XML documents. They're compressed and they're zipped, but they're XML documents at the end of the day. I mentioned SVG, that's an XML document.
Yeah.
And when you look at JSON today, stuff that was already in XML, it's like, oh, now we want schema for JSON. It's like, okay, good luck. And the people who did this thing called ASN.1 are looking at all of us and saying, you're just replicating what we did 50 years ago. So, I think another thing that could have helped XML at the time was better tooling. If you had an editor for entering your menus where you just said, look, user, just type these lines in. Forget about angle brackets and all that. Just type in the simple text editor. We'll turn it into XML on the back end. You don't even know what XML is. That would have helped, right?
That's interesting you say that, because that was actually ultimately our solution. Was we created a portal that the restaurant would log into, and they would just have a form and they would type and submit, type and submit. Then when they were done, they'd say done. And then all it really was doing was building the XML file in the background and then sending it over to us. So
who cares what the form, the end user doesn't care what the format is, only as programmers do. And we made the mistake of assuming that the end user cared about the format. It's like, they don't care about the format. They just want to enter their stuff.
Yeah, they couldn't care less what the format was. I mean, it's just like, I actually have been working with a client recently, do a lot of NetSuite work these days. And I was working with the client and they did an integration. And one of the first clients I've ever met that did it completely outside of NetSuite. So they built like this middleware. But then they keep telling me, oh, well, you don't need to know what that does. I'm like, well, but yes, actually I do, because you want me now to figure out why it's not working inside of NetSuite. I can't work with a black box, my friend. Like, you got to tell me what it's doing behind there, because it's clearly doing something wrong, because the data goes in correctly and it comes out incorrectly. But most people, you're right, like the restaurant manager doesn't care. And that's really what it was aimed to do, was to make data transfer simple between businesses. It just never took off. I mean, I honestly don't even think JSON correctly addresses it either. Other than the fact that you can get like a collection of nodes just like you could with XML. In fact, when I started working with JSON, I actually saw so many similarities to XML, and it actually made it easier to grasp because I'd already studied that. So tell me about your time at Microsoft. Like, that's everyone's always interested in people who worked at Microsoft. It's like this in the technical world, it's like the holy grail. That Google, Facebook today, Twitter, those are all the big companies. So tell me about that. What was it like?
So I joined in 1998 to work on XML, like we were talking about, and my time so before Microsoft, I had my own startup that was a going concern for about 12 years. And I had done stuff with Next Computers and the B operating system, all these esoteric things these days. So the earliest days were just exciting go-go. I went to Microsoft because a friend of mine said, hey, we're doing this XML thing. Why don't you come join us? It's like, and it was just the go-go years. I mean, that was the earliest days where the culture was much more violent than it is today. I'm gonna kill your product. My VP is bigger than your VP. It was the Bill Gates driven culture, and then eventually we went through the Steve Ballmer driven culture, which was more like, we care about the customers and how we get stuff done and stuff like that. And now it's the Satya Nadella culture, where the world matters most. We will make money, don't worry about it. How we show up in the world is what's most important. So I was there for 24 years. I actually left back in September, the end of September of 2022, just before all the layoffs. So, I mean, I probably would have survived that layoff too, but I left just before that. And it was, for me, just years and years and years of innovation, doing world scale things. I got to deliver engineering. I got to hire a bunch of people and teach them how to be engineers. I was in India for 3 years teaching engineers how to be engineers. I helped us get into, we now have a development offices in Nigeria and Kenya, which I helped push us towards. It is wonderful because every once in a while, every 2 years, I would re-up myself and say, is this still where I want to be? And the question really was, am I able to have the world impact that I want to have by staying here, right? And the answer was yes, 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 every 2 years, until this year, where I finally said, I've done as much as I can do there. I need to do something else now, right? Still world impact, but not with them.
So as a technology leader, what were some of the biggest problems that you faced on a regular basis?
Ooh, the biggest problems. I don't know. I wouldn't say problems, but I'd say challenges for sure. One of the biggest challenges was which had to do with me understanding how to really work for someone else, particularly people that I don't agree with. Especially when I came from running my own company, and then you run up against that boss who I'd say is a micromanager or something like that. It's like, okay, and it really chafed me for a while. And I had a friend who just said, well, what are you going to do about it? It's like, okay, yeah, stop whining. He's not the last micromanager you're ever going to have. Figure out how to work with this. This guy needs information. Give him information. That was one of the biggest challenges. The other challenge would be technology challenge, which is figuring out the balance. I'm a code writing guy. I write code every day today, and it's figuring out the balance of what you want to do because you like to play with code, what customers really need, without just asking them, what do you really need? Because oftentimes they don't know. So being able to project into the future and say, well, this is where it needs to go, and this is how we're going to have a competitive advantage. So the real challenge there is taking the swirl of technology around you and being able to synthesize it into, but what do we need to do? Right?
Right.
And do it quickly, because else in the world is saying the same thing, and they're going to beat you, especially today where things move like super fast, right? So
yeah, I mean, you're describing innovation. I mean, you're coming up with ideas that people don't even realize yet that they need.
Right.
But then it turns into a need. I mean, like, I can point to the iPhone as something that, like, today I couldn't run my business as well as I do without a smartphone. I'm not going to just say iPhone, but without a smartphone. And that's something none of us thought we needed, say, 15 years ago.
Yeah. And that was an interesting thing about Steve Jobs, and why I thought he was so great, was that he wouldn't just go out. I mean, nowadays it's like, oh, let's go do a customer study and figure out what the market needs. Like, Jobs had his own intuition as to what customers needed, even though they didn't even know they needed it. And he'd say, you need this smartphone thing. And 15 years later, it's like, of course I did. It's so obvious.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't
exactly.
at the time.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I sometimes I stop and think back because, during my time as the CTO for the restaurant delivery service, I would spend a couple of days a week working at home. I had a long drive. And so just to optimize coding days, I used to drive my CEO crazy because as the CTO, I still did coding. And I'd explain to him, you know what, man, I want to know what my developers are up to, and I want to make sure they're following the standards we set. And there's pieces of this code I'm in love with. And I just, like you said, what fun thing can I dig into? And I would dig into those. And it was always the most inane things. It wasn't like the menu system, which was super cool to develop. But I always felt like, I had to keep my fingers, in there. Not to be a micromanager, because that was the last thing that I would do. I worked with a lot of micromanagers that I one time had somebody, we had a fax piece to this system, and the person who wrote the code originally didn't think it through very well. And so they would randomly send orders to, like, you'd get a steak order and it would go to a Chinese restaurant, and the Chinese order would go to the steak restaurant, because the queue would get all jumbled up. And, you're using a modem. So you're using the phone system. It's super slow. So another developer and I each spent about 40 hours working on this. And by the time we were done, we put it out right before their busiest time of the year, and flawless. We were getting patted on the back by all the dispatchers. But one particular guy never said anything. And he was like the main boss. And so the other developer said something to him, and he goes, well, let me tell you something. See that light switch over there? When I flip it on in the morning, I don't call the electrician and thank him for making what's supposed to work. And we both just kind of laughed, and we were like, if you only knew what we had to go through to make it flawless, you'd be thanking us.
If you want to keep me around, you'll give me some praise.
All right. And that kind of brings me to, like, well, what was the culture like working at Microsoft? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, it certainly transitioned over those 24 years, right? Like
Sure,
I said, in the beginning, it is really, cutthroat might be a good word. I'll say it through explanation of what the environment was. When I joined in '98, they were still minting millionaires. So the classic pattern was you join Microsoft, you hang around for 4 or 5 years as your stock vests because the stock was going up, right? You were fresh out of college. By the time you're 28, you've got millions of dollars. You probably bought a couple of houses. You think you're the bomb. You retire by the 6th year. Common pattern. So that created people who would like, I'm gonna sleep in the office, But Elon Musk is now advocating, right? It's like, we're so hardcore, we just nail this stuff. Really smart people, they did create a lot of interesting stuff. Super hardcore, home life balance, forget that. What home? They're not even married, they don't have kids, none of that. They're young, right? Fresh out of college sort of people. Never worked anywhere else, have never seen a customer, and arrogant as all get out, right? It's like, we're Microsoft, we do it this way, and if you don't like it this way, you're wrong and we're right, and suck it up. Who are you going to go to? That was the culture. Who are you going to turn to? And then we got beat out. Netscape was eating our lunch on the browser thing that we almost missed completely. And then much later, the whole phone thing happened, and we didn't look good in that. Luckily, we did get into the game thing correctly, I think. So that through those years, and of course the DOJ, the Department of Justice was all over Microsoft for antitrust and was probably about to break him up and all that sort of stuff. That caused a lot of angst, a lot of documentation, and a lot of, just keep your heads down, just keep writing code, don't worry about this.
Let us handle it. Yeah,
let us handle it. And they did. And Microsoft's very good at making money, and they made money. And so that was one phase. Then we went through this transition period, like I said, with into power, where he said he didn't relax the sales quotas, but he did say, we're going to be more customer focused. He did try to soften things up, right? And a lot of the old guard left or was shown the door or whatever during his tenure. And his description of a lot of those senior executives at the time was they're just a bunch of cutthroat backstabbing. He was not very kind about those executives who were all jockeying for his position. And none of them made it except Satya Nadella. So that middle phase there was, okay, let's be so arrogant, let's focus on the customer. And then Satya comes in, and a lot of people had left Microsoft because of the culture at that time. I mean, it's the common meme of the industry was, Microsoft is Resident Evil, right? And then through the and we almost IBM'd ourselves. We almost became irrelevant. And then Satya comes along and says, we're going to go in a different direction. It was the birth of the cloud services stuff. We got a new lease on life, and it became much more caring, much more empathetic. I would say that the company gained empathy, right? That's the big transition. expresses itself in a lot of different ways. And a lot of people came back to the company because it's like, I hear Microsoft has changed. It's like, yeah, it definitely changed. And it was a much more reasonable place to work, not only because there's cutting edge engineering going on, but because it's just a nicer place to work. You're not always like, ew, this is icky. Why are we so evil? And now everyone else is evil. Got Google, Facebook, Twitter,
Right.
whoever. And Microsoft's like, oh yeah, grandpa's over in the corner doing his thing. Right. So we're the kind elder statesman of the industry at this point, and people forget about the evil past, except, oh no, you're still Resident Evil.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Like when you mentioned Elon Musk and Twitter, and I mean, I've watched that with some amusement because, first of all, most people don't realize that Elon Musk is a software engineer, so
Yeah.
he understands the code better than they think he does.
Yeah.
And the second thing I think is he's more from like our era. Like I'm a 58-year-old guy, I've been in technology most of my life, and you're right. I mean, I can remember working for Herbalife
Oh
and
yeah.
just coding their back end. And we were in a room with just like multiple 6-foot long tables, just in a row, in a row, in a row. And it was just, you had to produce code. That's what you had to do. And if you didn't produce code, you were out of there.
Yeah.
And it was very, very cutthroat. And there was no, oh, I have to go to my kid's baseball game. They didn't want to
Kids,
hear
what
that.
kids?
Exactly. They don't
You
want to
don't
hear
have time
that.
for kids.
Right. They don't want to hear that. And so that's why like all the whining and complaining about Twitter, and I call it whining and complaining because I mean, it's your job. And so you've got a new boss. I don't really care what the previous environment was like. You got to either deal with the new environment or move on. I mean, it's really, you're in control of that, whether you stay or you go. But I'm just kind of an old school, you put your head down, you do the work. I run a few tech teams for NetSuite stuff, and I tell them, I want you to get rest. I don't want you working, 80-hour weeks. But at the same time, if we have a deadline and the client wants something by Tuesday, it has to be done by Tuesday. There's no whining about it, complaining about it. We just have to do it. But I also try to get their buy-in beforehand. I feel like the leadership aspect is what used to be lacking back then.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually can tell you a story that I worked for Transamerica Life Insurance as a contractor, and they had done huge layoffs of COBOL programmers, and I was a .NET programmer. And so they had me on a team of 3. And so we would sit there, and our manager was a former COBOL programmer, and he would go to the meetings, and he would come back and he'd say, all right, guys, so they want 2 things. They want to move a button, and they want this entire table to be sortable. I told them that we can have the button within 2 weeks and the table sortable by tomorrow. And you'd go, you got that backwards,
dude.
Like it's the other way, man. It's not, we can have the button in 10 seconds, but the sortable, especially back then, the sortable, no, you can't have that in by tomorrow. It's not happening. And the point being that the leadership just wasn't there, and it wasn't his fault. He didn't know anything about what we were doing. And I think that was one of the things I tried to fix. Like for example, we wanted money. They had a client server application, and it was just dog slow because of the internet, really. And I wanted to switch it all to .NET, and it's going to be about a $500,000 project. This was a huge piece of software. And they said, no, we're not spending that. So I took some of my own budget, and we had a dispatch screen that was just basically this big grid that would change colors depending on what markings they would put in. And it was the slowest piece of the software. And I took it, and I just dropped a web control on the form, did a .NET in the backside, put it out. Next thing, I'm getting calls. What did you do to the dispatch screen? And I thought, uh-oh. And like, it's so fast. It's lightning fast. So then I had a meeting, and I pitched the entire executive team, and I said, old dispatch screen, new dispatch screen. Which do you prefer? New dispatch screen. Well, that's the $500,000 route. They bought in. They paid for it. The point being, I think if tech leaders would bother to get buy-in from their staff, there'd be less problems. Like when I tell a client I'm going to have something by Tuesday and it's Friday, it's only after consulting with my team first.
Right. And getting them And I would say that, back to the question of what changed culturally, for me as a leader at Microsoft, I always did exactly what you said. It's like, okay, I'm not going to impose a deadline on you. You're going to tell me, you're going to commit to a deadline that you come up with, but I'm going to hold you to it because you came up with it, right? So, because when I first joined the company, the boss it was just horrible. It was like, oh, we're gonna spend nights and weekends and blah. It's like, wait a minute, you need to get us to commit to completing features, not just spending nights and weekends here, because we can have dinners and spend nights and weekends and not deliver anything, right?
Yeah, it's like having a goal to lose weight, but not saying how much and by when.
Yeah, it's like you need
So
to
you
lose
can just
weight.
be like, I haven't gotten
Okay.
there yet. I'm still working on it. I'm still working on it. I'm still
Yeah,
working on it over and over and over. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Is it good enough? Is it fast enough? I'll tell you when it's fast enough. So, it is definitely for sure you need to as for the working hours and stuff like that, I never really talk about that stuff with my people. It's always the work. When can we get it done? And of course, I'm moderating. It's like if they say, "Oh, 5 months," it's like I don't think so. I think this is 2 months or whatever it is, right? So I'm certainly, like you said, you have to be in the code, or else you don't know if they're blowing smoke at you or not.
Exactly. That was a big reason why I was always in the code. And like, I also didn't want to make the decision for them because
Right.
like I've even worked on teams as a contractor since then. Because I mean, they laid a bunch of us off in the 2008 economic downturn. And I've worked with other contractors and I'll be in a meeting and they'll say, "What, Mike, when can you get this done by?" And I'll say, in 2 days. And then we're walking away from the meeting and one of the teammates would be like, "Why did you say 2 days? That would take me at least 6 days." And I'd say, well, it's not going to take me 6 days. It's going to take me 2 days. And that's kind of the point is if it's going to take me 2 days, it's going to take the rest of them 6 days, and let them make the decision. It's going to take 6 days rather than go with what I think, because I'm faster than you are. I've done
Yeah.
this longer. I mean,
Right.
I used to tell them like, I remember the days when active server pages first came out and you used Access database as the back end. But you'd get this if you didn't set your server up correctly. Access writes a locking file to the file system. Well, if you don't let the anonymous user have write access to do that, you just get in the upper left corner of the browser error.
Yeah. Error.
And then
An
people
error occurred.
and then people would say, literally, it just was one word, error. And people would say, "That's stupid. Why don't they tell you that there's a file?" Well, do you want the hacker to know that the
To
file
know
lives at
exactly
this
what's going
location
on.
and he needs to give it permissions? I mean, do you want that? Because I don't. And I tell
Yeah.
people that, like, I've gone through the era where they weren't very, specific about the error messages and all of that. I remember I've probably forgotten more than a lot of those kids will ever know. But that's because
Yeah.
we came through when technology was doing this, it's growing. It
Yeah.
wasn't just branching out. That's interesting. I think what you're describing is why Microsoft is still around today, because you described a bunch of gaffes that they made,
Yeah.
like the phone, et cetera. The browser was a big one. That's
Yeah.
a really big one. And yet they're still here. And the only way they can be here is if they fixed their cultural issues that they had in the beginning and not be so cutthroat, because no one's going to stick around. I mean, I actually think that's one of the things people were worried about with Twitter. But the reality is he knew what he was doing. He knew who was going to stay and
Yeah.
who was going to go. And he wanted those who were going to go.
Yep.
Why
He
he
wants
did
those.
it.
Yeah, and it turns out that he was just the harbinger of things to come. I mean, now every company's like slash
Right?
and burn.
Right.
He was just
Right.
kind of vocal about it and kind of. I mean, Elon Musk is a love and hate kind of guy, so it's like, oh, he's so evil when he did it. It's like, yeah, but he did everything. He's doing the same thing everybody else is now doing
He
because the
even went so
economics said he
far.
had to.
He even went so far as give them not terminate them for 3 months, not make it
Yeah.
effective for 3 months, so that then he could give them their severance check so that he could abide by the law. And then I don't know who complains about still getting paid but not being
We're
forced
not
to work.
working.
I don't understand that
It's
at
just
all.
news. I mean, we have to talk about something in the news cycles, and Elon Musk is the favorite whooping horse, even though he's
Yeah,
innovating like crazy. So, it is what it is.
currently, yeah. So what are you currently up to?
So I'm currently doing stuff on my own. If The best description of what I'm doing is creating the Motown of tech. Uh,
Okay.
And what I mean by that is just like Motown, for those of us who are old enough, attracted some of the best Black talent in the entertainment industry, developed into their careers, like Stevie Wonder, the Jackson Five, Aretha
Right.
Franklin, all those well-known Black singers. So what I've identified in the tech space for my Black tribe is that we don't have a lot of support for, we don't have our Motown. We don't have that thing that identifies the talent and fosters it and moves it along. So I'm doing things to bring that talent in. So I'm developing software that's cutting edge, that I can showcase and say, look, this is what I'm doing. Hey, look, I've got these multi-million-dollar contracts. You want to be here. So that we can help develop you so that you can get out there and start your own company, be acqui-hired, whatever. You don't need to be in the wilderness on your own. So that's what I'm doing, writing a lot of code, doing a lot of podcasts, writing a lot of stuff, making appearances, make money, right?
Good. Well, I mean, I have a similar passion. You mentioned earlier about going to Nigeria and Kenya and working with the people to get them more savvy with technology and how to be a programmer. And my wife and I co-own a virtual assistant agency, and one of the areas of the world where there's a lot of people who want to do virtual assistant work, but they just get the door slammed in their face, is Nigeria, and West Africa area. And I have hired many of those people. I'm getting to the point where I think I'm actually going to explore opening a VA agency of nothing but African help, because I feel horrible that because there's some bad folks who scam people that they blackball the entire country. I mean, I tell people all the time, there's ways to be safe if you're worried about that, but you got to give people a chance. If you don't give them a chance, I mean, sure, if you want to keep them on a super short leash and cut them loose because they did one small thing wrong, that's okay with me if you want to start that way. But at least let them get their foot in the door, because I know you're not going to cut them loose, because they're really good, hardworking people who want this job probably more than most American people do.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's talent everywhere, right? I mean, it's like I've been doing a lot of work, not a lot, but some work in the Caribbean during COVID. I actually a group of people down to U.S. Virgin Islands because we're kind of kickstarting some stuff there. And now we're going into Jamaica, and it's like there's people all over the planet.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. And I think that's where that's one area where tech leaders could help forge a new trail, is see that and see to it that those places are getting help. I mean, I once worked with a guy as a partner, and he has a lot of developers down in Brazil, and very smart engineers. They even have their ways of getting around like the accent issues, so you can understand them. They work really hard to make sure that they integrate really well, and yet people have their bias, and so they don't hire those people. And I feel bad for the people on that end, because they're like, hey, I can do a better job than the guy you hired, and I'm doing it for less money. How about you get me into your company? It's an interesting situation. It's not just a tech issue, obviously, tech world issue. All fields of work, now that we're going so much remote, I think everybody could look into this, and they could find some really good staff, probably for less money. That's not so important, though. See, to me, what I do is, if I'm going to pay somebody $20 an hour to do the job, and you have equal skills, I'm paying you $20 an hour to do the job. I don't care where you live.
That's the value. Is $20 an hour.
It's like, exactly. I pay by the value.
You don't adjust for cost of living in where they are. It's like, if they want to live there, that's up to them, but it's worth $20 an hour for me.
Well, right. I mean, and I kind of look at it like the digital nomad thing that's going on. If I have a $200,000 a year job in the United States, but they allow me to work from anywhere in the world, and I decide to go live in the Philippines because it's cheaper,
good on you, mate, right?
Who cares? It's on me. But vice versa, if they're coming to me and I'm saying, here's this job I'm willing to pay $200,000 a year, And they're like, oh, no. I only want like $10,000 a year. No, the value of this
It's
job is
$200,000.
$200,000 a year. So, that's what I'm going, if I feel you're qualified, it's what I'm going to offer you.
Yeah,
And I think that's another thing that companies need to work on. And since this show, we focus on helping leaders to lead better.
yeah,
And I think, a lot of times we focus on the problems of the leader. But one thing you won't usually hear leaders talk about is stuff like this, because they don't see that as a problem that they specifically have. They see that
yeah,
more as a problem their company has. But as a leader, I personally believe it's up to you to be the trailblazer and help your company understand this is the better way to do it.
yep,
And when we introduced you, we talked about the fact that you're also a philanthropist, and so I knew when I read that we would get along, because I'm really huge on helping other people. It's why I got into programming in the first place, to be
yeah.
honest, is help people fix their problems.
It's also I take it as a responsibility. I mean, we as programmers and whatnot have taken a lion's share of the wealth of the planet, right? I mean, when you look at the top billionaires in the world, they're all, well, not now, but mostly tech guys.
Yeah.
And it's like, come on, we scooped up all that treasure. We need to spend it on the people. You're not going to take it to your grave. So you need to
Yeah.
spend it. They gave it to you, or it was ripped out of their hands. You have to spend it on people. Or else, what are you doing? Right?
Yeah,
I
no, I
mean, take
agree.
care of your family and all that sort of stuff, and that's all great. But you have to turn to the society that put you in that position and say, thank you, society, I'm giving back. Right?
Totally
So
100% agree with you. So, well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. We're kind of running out of time. I'd love to have you come back, though, to continue down this road.
yeah.
But why don't you tell people how they can get in touch with you?
Best way to get in contact with me is I have a website, william-a-adams.com. And from there, I've got all my little social icons and postings of videos I do and code I write and all. So william-a-adams.com.
All right, I'll make sure that gets into the show notes. And thank you again for being part of the show.
Thank you
Thanks.
for having me.
All right. And thanks for tuning in to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. That we hope you've had a great time with us, learning everything you need to know to stay ahead of the technology curve. Remember, be curious, be updated on all the latest trends, and show them who's boss. Until next time, we'll be back with plenty more techie tips and tricks so you can stay on top of your game. See ya, people.